In my mind as well, but we might as well circle the drain together. If you guys live on the East Coast, New York in particular, on Saturday morning, you're going to be greeted by a toxic plume of orange smoke once again because Canada continues to burn down. The global conflict continues to intensify and FOMO is back in the market. So if you got some money that's burning a hole in your pocket, you know, that currency that's being devalued, you might as well throw it into the stock market furnace. But for those of you who are into that sort of thing, I'm going to be talking about it. I don't want to call it a stock pick. I don't want to call it market advice because that would get me canceled. We're just going to call it something that I'm looking into in terms of stock picks. Okay, so we're going to get to that later on in the video. For those of you who want to hold out just a little bit of hope for the future, stick with me. Now, New York City, toxic plume is coming your way, should make it there on Saturday morning. Unfortunately, Canada's wildfires continue unabated by recent precipitation. We've had a lot of rain in some of these regions. These fires are just so massive that they just flare up again. And we've already seen, put in perspective, more area burned than any other year on record. And it's not even really summer in Canada yet. The real hot season doesn't start till late June. So this is going to be one for the ages. In fact, the fire you're seeing behind me here, this is the Donny Creek Fire Complex in northern British Columbia. You can see the firefighters are attempting a fire break and they're doing a prescribed burn here. This isn't even a fraction of the size of this fire. You could not fit it all on one screen unless you were looking at it from space. This fire is nearly the size of Vancouver Island, and it's possibly going to double, if not triple, in size. Okay? This could be the apocalyptic wildfire that, you know, we've been talking about for so long. Firefighters are doing their best to control it, but it's definitely one for the ages, man. And it's going to be a long, hot, smoky summer, and this probably is only going to get worse in years to come. So anyways, let's head on out to the East-West Theater, where the conflict appears to be intensifying by the day. Belarus got its nuclear Christmas present early. They weren't supposed to get it until July 7th, you know, right ahead of that NATO summit in Vilnius. But I guess Putin decided to be nice and move it there in advance. Now, the question is, why is there such an urgency to get these nuclear weapons into Belarus? Well, if you've been paying attention to what's been happening on the border between Poland and Belarus, allegedly there was some shots fired just a couple days ago. We only heard about this a few hours ago. But according to Polish authorities, the Belarusians fired a shot over the Belarusian border, over the Polish-Belarusian border just a couple days ago. Nobody was hit. They don't even know if it was a gunshot. We don't even know if this was true necessarily. Nonetheless, we know that those borders are being more fortified. Poland has been playing with various forces, military forces and deployments along the border region for some time. Both sides are starting to arm up on both ends of that border. And some people suspect that NATO's strategy is to move forces towards the Polish-Belarusian border in order to fix Russia's forces in that region to take away from what's going on in the counteroffensive in the south and east right now. But there's lots of different theories. All we know is that the situation and the war could very well peak in the coming weeks ahead. Many are saying that the main thrust of the counteroffensive hasn't even started yet. You got to be very careful. There's lots of disinformation online on both sides. I'm going to be brutally honest. I still don't know what to think, but I'm going to do my best to try to get you the information that you need to make a clear assessment of the situation. Ukraine is allegedly going to be unofficially, in a de facto sort of way, brought under NATO's auspices. According to Olaf Scholz, they're going to get security guarantees in the upcoming Vilnius summit. Lots of talk around some new groundbreaking agreements that are being made in the back channels between Ukraine and NATO, effectively making them a NATO country without making them a NATO member, so to speak. And what this is going to amount to is World War III with NATO and the Russians, because of course that's a big red line for Russia, is Ukraine's entry into NATO. So what they mean is what's left of Ukraine. Because the Russians right now, Vladimir Putin has said that we're not going to do a general mobilization of the military. That means we're not going to have a large-scale draft until we burn through all our prisoners. Because now they've taken on the responsibility of conscripting prisoners. They're not allowing the Wagner group to do that anymore. Apparently, they're just doing it themselves. So the Russian government got the idea, you know what? The Wagner group made a good point about these prisoners. You know, they don't complain. They just want 3 hots and a cot. They're used to a regimented lifestyle. Way better than conscripting from the general population. So we're first going to burn through all of our prisoners who are easier to train. They have that aggressive mentality already, that soldier-like mentality. So let's put them into war and see if they're useful first. But he has said that the only way we call for a general widespread mobilization is if we decide to march on Kiev, almost as if signaling that he's willing to do that if NATO doesn't back off. And we know NATO is showing no signs of backing off. It's looking as though Putin will take Kharkov and Odessa. That's the plan. What they're trying to do is see how far Ukraine makes it with this counteroffensive. Once again, some analysts are saying that the main thrust of the offensive hasn't even begun yet. Depending on who you listen to, the Russians are destroying German Leopard tanks left and right. It's easy peasy, shooting fish in a barrel. Other people say you're just showing the same video from 50 different angles. And I gotta admit, I don't know what to think about the current situation. All I can say is that it's gonna get ugly before it gets better. Now, Zaluzhny, you know, the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, or the supposed commander, still was absent from a NATO meeting. In fact, Lloyd Austin made mention of his absence at the meeting today. This, of course, is suspicious as rumors have been swirling about his absence for the past month or so. So is he still here? Did he have a stroke? Did he have some other health complication? Or was, as some Russian bloggers have suspected, was he taken out in a Kinzhal missile strike? I guess we'll never really know the truth as we enter the deep fake age. For all we know, it's all a deep fake and space is fake and the earth is flat and the whole 9 yards. I'm just kidding, guys. I haven't gone off that deep end yet, and I never will. Depleted uranium for Abrams tanks has been green-lit by the U.S. military. I mean, these things don't even surprise me anymore. Everything they've speculated that they're going to do, maybe we'll send ATACMS. Yeah, we'll never send nuclear weapons. They're going to do it all. I guarantee you there's going to be nuclear weapons in Ukraine someday, or at least the deployment systems, which we know those are already coming in the form of F-16s and F-18s. We know those are going there. That's the system to deploy nuclear weapons. Ergo, Ukraine effectively has nuclear weapons, especially if it's a member of NATO, which is interoperable, so they can use the nuclear weapons of the United States at the drop of a hat. It's going to get ugly, guys. Big cyber attack on the USA, and possibly one in store for Europe. The hybrid war is heating up. Canada and Russia relations on the verge of collapse because Justin decided to confiscate a very expensive Russian plane and just give it to the Ukrainians. How are they going to fly it, considering there's no fly zone? I don't know. I guess it's for after the war. We keep hearing about Ukraine after the war. What's Ukraine going to be after the war is the question. He also gave them $500 million as well. The Czech president has suggested that all Russians, the complete Russian diaspora, should be monitored, especially in Europe. Sounds like fascism to me. Sounds like getting people into camps eventually. That's a slippery slope, I think. Let's hope that we don't go to those levels of Russophobia, but you just never know. Nothing would surprise me at this point in time. Every time I think that people are starting to wake up and see this issue from both sides, I go and I look at the view counts of these very, very hardline, pro-mainstream, lamestream, pro-NAFO, pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine channels, and they are just blowing up millions of views on every single video. It is insane. So I used to think that we were getting a little bit closer to the narrative shifting, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it's still 80% in the very least leaning towards unrelenting support of Ukraine and the NATO alliance, which I support the Ukrainians' right to sovereignty and democracy and all that good stuff and not being invaded by the Russians. But at the end of the day, we need to consider that we're all going to suffer if this thing escalates to the nuclear level. On July 11th at the Vilnius summit, the NATO summit, a lot of new things are going to be determined. There's going to be a new council apparently created for Ukraine, which is a step up in terms of NATO's commitment to Ukraine. Like I said, it's unofficial NATO membership from Ukraine from this point forward. It appears that both sides are panicking. Poland is asking for nuclear weapons to counter Belarus's nuclear weapons. Now, Poland, already a member of NATO, they have the means to deploy these systems, and honestly, the United States could have nuclear weapons there in no time, tactical nukes, so it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility. The Zaporozhye nuclear power plant pools that they use to cool the spent fuel rods is dwindling drastically, and in fact, I have a video to show you guys here. This is the nuclear power plant from across the river, okay? Now, you can't really see it too well, but you can see the water is almost nil. Like there's barely any water now. This is across the river. And some people have suspected that the goal of this whole blowing of the dam was to, yes, first cause a flood that would wash away all the Russian fortifications and townships on the left bank of the Dnieper River. But afterwards, the water levels would actually be lower. Okay, because that dam is no longer there, water is no longer being held back and managed and rerouted to Crimea. So now the water level is actually could possibly be lower than it was before, and now Ukraine controls the flow of water with the 5 other dams on the waterway. So there could be an incursion in that direction towards the south of Ukraine, where the Russians, this is where the Russians are over here, this is Ukraine, where they are. It's definitely possible. What else do we got to talk about? Putin's master plan, mobilization. What is it all about? I tell you, man, I don't think I've seen Putin sweat once throughout this entire conflict. And I think that says a lot, that maybe we're being fed a load of BS in the Western media about how well we are doing in this conflict. Remember, the biggest battle that we've been in I don't know, in some time, what was it, the Battle of Fallujah? And I think that was, how many guys died in that? Like 50 guys? It went on for a week. We have not seen a high-intensity conflict like this, probably really maybe for parts of World War II, but I don't think we've ever seen this level of high-intensity conflict. All of our new fancy equipment, the F-22, the only service it's seen is shooting down a balloon. So, let's not even get into the feminization of our military and all of that other stuff. I just don't think we're ready to go to war with the Russians, but what do I know? We have Nazi skulls washing up on shore. So when the dam was blown, it washed up a bunch of graves. And apparently, allegedly, there was this Nazi skull with a rusted out helmet. Now, was this just Russia sending a message? Because it seems way too foretelling and foreshadowing to be true. You know, I mean, because you just think about the context that this is happening, the Leopard tanks, the NIZIs, the Azov, and the dams that were blown in World War II, and the whole history of this region. You know, I mean, if that was just by happenstance, then that is very strange. That is mysterious. Perhaps that is foreshadowing, and perhaps we should pay attention to those types of signs that the universe is sending us. Did I talk about the Russian conscription of prisoners? I think I may have touched upon that. But yeah, the Russians are conscripting prisoners. It used to just be the Wagner Group that was doing this, but now the Russians have realized this is a really good idea. You know, these guys are not going to put up a fight. They're going to volunteer. They're used to 3 hots and a cot. They're used to the regimented lifestyle, and they're very aggressive by nature. They're really the ideal soldier. In fact, maybe these social deviants, maybe this is the environment that they've been waiting to thrive in. Okay, so full pardons for everybody who goes and dies on the front line. Israel may send Merkava tanks to some mysterious European country. Some people are speculating that the Merkava tanks, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, which are among one of the best tanks in the world, so they say, although I'm sure those ones as well have never seen a high-intensity conflict like this to be tested in. Some people are saying that those 200 Merkava tanks are headed to Ukraine. Now, this would really put a wrench into Russian-Israeli relations. And of course, that wrench is already in there as a result of Russia's partnership with Iran, sending Iran Su-35s and the whole 9 yards. So I'm pretty sure the dividing lines between East and West have been made abundantly clear, and Israel is on the side of NATO. Yellen is warning about de-dollarization. She's saying you're probably going to see some people divest from the US dollar, but don't worry about it because we're going to do our best to crash the European economy and make the euro worthless, so that should keep the dollar propped up for a while. Well, she didn't say that last part. I said that last part. But that's pretty much what's going to happen. They're going to try to make up for the losses on the part of BRICS and all these other countries like Pakistan and African countries wanting to trade in Chinese or rubles. And they're going to try to make up for it by crashing the euro market. That's at least what I foresee. It seems like somebody, I wonder who, is in the business of getting countries to fight with one another, be they Israel or Iran. We're hearing talks about how Iran is going to now go back to the table with the United States and that they're going to broker a new deal for the nuclear situation and a new nuclear deal. And Israel has said, if you make this deal, we're going to have to attack Iran. So makes you wonder, are they just doing this in order to instigate, they being the United States of America, who has to maintain global financial hegemony for their own society not to collapse? Their own, I mean ours as well, because Canada is tethered to that sinking ship, especially with the guy that we have in power right now. We have a Russian nuclear hypothesis. Some people are saying we should escalate to de-escalate now. We should use a nuke right now so that we can save the world at a later date, because the longer the United States and NATO are allowed to mission creep into this conflict without any consequence, the greater the likelihood that a mutually assured destruction scenario arises. We have, oh yeah, my stock tip, which I'm not going to share with you guys till the end. And it's not a stock tip. It's not financial advice. It's just what I might consider doing in light of the circumstances. Now, the FUDometer is a little bit lower today, and that's because Anthony Blinken is supposedly going to China once again. Remember that visit that got canceled because of the balloons and stuff? Well, he's supposedly going back there again, but I'm pretty sure that trust between China and the United States is pretty much dead at this point. The Chinese see what's going on with Russia, and they see that, you know, the United States is just speaking with a forked tongue. So the FUDometer is at 80, just to be more optimistic, and because of the FOMO in the markets, I figured I would turn it down a notch. So we're back to 80. However, the shit's still hitting the fan on the whole. And in fact, in the next month, by July 11th, I do believe that we're going to see a major escalation in the conflict, because Russia keeps getting its red lines violated, whether it's depleted uranium now from 2 countries instead of 1, attacks on the Crimean bridge, which are inevitable at this point as Ukraine tries to stab southwards with this offensive. What else is there? I mean, just Ukraine being in talks to go into NATO, and Jens Stoltenberg saying that Ukraine will be a member of NATO someday, when this has always been a red line for Russia from the start. Ukraine not joining NATO ever. So the war is only escalating in spite of the fact that we're not really talking about it here in our media, and all we're talking about is Trump. And by the sounds of things, that could amount to a civil war as well. I can't remember who it was, but somebody today, she was a prominent political figure. I can't remember her name. Some of you people are going to say it in the comments section. She basically said that, you know, if you want to get Trump, you got to come through us and all of our millions of guns. So it could get ugly in the United States. So we're going to see how long this YouTube policy of being a bit more liberal in their monetization of political topics. We'll see how long it lasts. I realize their stock price is plummeting in some ways, not their stock price, but their earnings, their year-to-date earnings for ad revenue, and they're trying to, be a bit more liberal in what they allow to be monetized, but they might have to put that cat back in the bag at some point. So let's just take a quick tour around the world here and let's see what is going on. The U.S. is sending F-22 Raptors to Syria. I tell you, man, Syria is just a hotbed of activity. Here's a fun story for you guys. Check this out. I didn't know this. I mean, I knew that Russia was using dolphins, but I always thought it was kind of just, for like suicide attacks or something like that. Anyways, recall that the training of dolphins in the Crimea began in Soviet times. Since 1975, they've been used by the 102nd Detachment for combating submarine sabotage forces. And now they've doubled the fleet. They've doubled the number of fighting dolphins guarding the naval base in Sevastopol. So they are mobilizing. Like I've said, guys, they're mobilizing, just not mobilizing the human species. Putin is talking about withdrawing from the grain deal, and I think he's put the laws into place, or they're taking the legal steps to basically get rid of that in the next month or so. That's going to see the price of food and grain likely escalate substantially. Now, the most important story of the day, there's quite a few, in fact. Some of this news is from yesterday. Poland has increased the intensity of its military exercises, and they're preparing to open a second front to fight Russia. Now, this is according to a Belarusian analyst. Exercise Anaconda 23 ended last week, and Poland, we're seeing all these 23 exercises, Arctic 23, Defender 23, which is ongoing, largest NATO exercise ever right now, Anaconda 23, and closely linked to the U.S. exercise or Defender 23 as part of the initiative to consolidate exercises along NATO's eastern flank called Exercise Trifecta. The maneuver scenario includes the entire architecture of the Polish armed forces. They involve not only all types of troops, but all key elements of the non-military infrastructure of the Polish regions, northern, central, especially eastern Poland. Now, the reason why this is of concern to Belarus is because apparently there were shots fired across the border. And some people are suspecting that something is trying to be instigated between Belarus and Poland to bring Poland and NATO as a whole into the conflict. And of course, this would mean that Russia would have to reposition lots of its troops along the Belarusian border, I would presume. Now, Lukashenko has fixed this problem by the placement of nuclear weapons. But nuclear weapons aren't, a guarantee. There's potential for these nuclear weapons to be shot down or intercepted. I'm assuming that you could do a preemptive strike and you could take out these weapons if it ever came down to that. Now, obviously, Russia would come to the aid of Belarus, who is closely intertwined in this conflict and is indispensable from a strategic point of view, but it makes you wonder if something is fitting to pop off along this border. You have the NATO summit happening in Vilnius, the rollout of the Patriot missile defense systems in Vilnius, now the nuclear weapons. You have these shots fired across the border. There's constant taunting across the border, like the Belarusians, they play these recordings to the Polish soldiers across the border saying that, teasing them and stuff like that. But it appears as though there's some fixing operation going on there in some way, shape, or form. I guess we're just going to have to see what it amounts to. But we also have something else happening in Poland, and apparently there was protests against this. Mass protests against anti-Russian law in Warsaw. So this is on the same day that the Czech president suggested that all Russians, not diasporic Russians per se, but Russian citizens living abroad, should be monitored, leading some people to believe that we're talking about, concentration camp 2.0 here. Anyways, the main reason for these protests in Warsaw, Poland, was that a recent law by the ruling far-right Law and Justice Party establishing a special commission against Russian influence in the style of anti-communist and anti-Soviet McCarthyite hearings of the early 1950s, the Special Commission Against Russian Influence would hold public hearings. If influence is found, defendants can be fined and banned from holding political office for up to 10 years. So not really in the spirit of democracy, is it? According to the Czech president, Russians in the West should be monitored. We are only observing the beginning. It is moderate, let's say so. I believe that we have not yet seen the real counteroffensive. So he's one of the other guys that's saying, just give it a minute, and we're going to see the main thrust of the offensive very, very soon. All this stuff you're seeing. I mean, the Ukrainians have only taken 100 square kilometers. So they're using square kilometers. Whenever you hear square kilometers, you know that it's not much territory that they've taken, because when you start hearing about 100 kilometers of actual advance, that's a little different. But 100 square kilometers is 10 kilometers, 10 by 10. It's not really a whole lot of land, considering how much they've thrown at it thus far. Anyways, many, including Mark Milley himself and other leaders, believe that the real offensive hasn't even started, and I would have to agree with that. I'm leaning in that direction. My gut is telling me that the Ukrainians do have a much bigger plan than this, that this can't be the plan, and if it is, then it's just, I don't want to say the S word again, because this video would certainly be demonetized, but you guys catch my drift. What we are seeing right now, according to him, is shaping operations. He believes, as in the case of a number of world conflicts in the past, during the ongoing war, security measures against Russian citizens should be stricter than in peacetime. Thus, all Russian citizens living in Western countries need to be monitored much more closely than before. Now, a lot of people, they might have Russian dual citizenship, but have never been back to the country, or, they haven't went there in many, many decades, or they don't really keep close contacts with people in Russia anymore. They're going to be affected by this if this eventually rolls out. And it starts somewhere. It starts in a small country like Czechoslovakia, and then I don't think that's what they call it anymore, this Czech Republic or whatever. But then it spreads, just like how the Iceland turfing the Russian embassy, very small country, very inconsequential, but it's going to spread. In fact, it could be Canada that's the first country to completely sever, substantial country, I should say, in NATO, to completely sever ties with the Russians. And that, of course, is bad for us, because we're going to be one of the first nuclear targets. We get nuked before the United States. The nukes hit us first. And the meeting between Duda, Scholz, and Macron was fully aligned on NATO plans for a staggering escalation of the NATO war with Russia and Ukraine, this article says. At a joint press conference at the Elysee presidential palace, they laid out a program leading to a total war with Russia, which is, of course, a major nuclear armed state. They called for Ukraine to join NATO, which is effectively a war with Russia, and for Russia to be permanently demilitarized and rendered incapable of waging military operations against any neighboring state. So you got to wonder, what are these guys smoking? Can they not see that in bankrupting themselves, that they're only empowering two other countries, namely Russia and the United States? Because Russia will simply trade with the East. Russia would prefer to trade with Europe, which is why they built all those pipelines. Now those pipelines have been detonated and will never go live again. And the only one that's really benefiting from a lot of this is the United States and their liquid natural gas industry. It's going to be an interesting month, guys, a real interesting month. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, because this is getting weird. Counteroffensive will help Kiev in negotiations. Will it? Will it really help Kiev in negotiations? The Russians have already said we're taking back all our annexed territory. So assuming that the Ukrainians can get to Crimea, you have Putin, who's not sweating at all. I know some people say he's shaking and he's turning his back to his head of the defense ministry, and he's nervous, and this guy does not seem fazed at all by what's going on. It seems like he does have a master plan in place that they haven't even executed yet. Now, I'm going to try to get some people of the pro-Russian view on the channel, and I want to get some people of the pro-Ukrainian view on the channel, and we're not going to get them on at the same time, because that wouldn't be good. It'd just turn into a shouting match. But I want to get them on at separate times to try to explain to me the logic behind a lot of this stuff we're seeing here, and give me an argument, compel me to believe that either side is truly winning. Because if you listen to the Ukrainians, they haven't even burned yet 1% of their counteroffensive forces. And if you listen to the Russians, they haven't even gotten started yet. Putin is just lounging, maxing and relaxing, just waiting to really pull the trigger on this war. NATO chief says Russia must lose to send a message to China. What? And you got Blinken going to China? I mean, come on. I really don't know. Maybe we're the paper tiger, guys. Maybe we really are the paper tiger with our untested, fancy military equipment and our feminized military and this hundreds of billions of dollars of weapons that appear to be barely winning the Ukrainians any ground, 100 square kilometers so far. It does not look good. It looks like we're getting worked, like we are getting murked. And a lot of this fancy equipment that we use is designed for low intensity, high intensity conflict. So it's designed when you have a supreme advantage, places like Afghanistan, or places where you can just launch a bunch of missiles because the opposing country doesn't have any air defense, or you have air superiority. That's what our weapons are designed for, so that they could be maintained and worked on. They require a lot of maintenance. They're not analog. Sure, the Russians are using brute force, archaic technologies, but they can use them over and over and over again. And I think we've believed our own hype into thinking that we are so technologically advanced that this style of World War I trench warfare was a thing of the past, and that's really all it is. The only difference is now we have drones, which is why the Ukrainian military is going to train 10,000 UAV operators. So if you guys want to go into an occupation that you're guaranteed to have work in the future, at least until they figure out some AI algorithm to do this better, which I'm sure they will at some point, get your UAV pilot's license and train. This reminded me of a movie called Toys with Robin Williams. Man, did this movie really nail it. This was back in, I think, the late 80s, early 90s. And I can't stand the movie. It's really annoying to watch. But they make this really, this just amazing prediction about how video games in the future are going to be used in war. And they get all these kids, they make the kids think that they're playing a video game, but they're actually controlling real weapons, robots that are being used in combat. Very prescient stuff. Budanov, where the hell is Budanov? They released what appeared to be some kind of deepfake video the other day. They say the Russians are saying he's got a head injury. Who knows? Again, nobody knows what's real anymore. I don't know what's real. Are we even here? Do we even exist? This is an interesting thesis. By using its nuclear weapons, Russia could save humanity from a global catastrophe. You remember when Evgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, said, "We should have used nukes right at the start. That would have stopped this thing in its tracks." Remember last year when I was going on and on about how, the nukes are going to fly any day now? Because that's what most people thought at the time, because all these red lines were being crossed. Well, I can't remember exactly who wrote this article, but you can just, grab a snippet of the text and you can go and read some more of it. I believe I got this off of, it was a credible site, but this is a Russian academic, anyways, who's saying this. So it's obviously from the Russian point of view. He says the credibility of nuclear deterrence must be restored by lowering the unacceptably high threshold for the use of atomic weapons, and by moving cautiously but quickly up the ladder of deterrence escalation. Now, before I read the rest of this, I got to say I don't agree with Scott Ritter and friends that one use of a nuclear weapon is going to immediately elicit NATO's blowing their wad completely. You very well could see a scenario where Russia, for whatever reason, does a demonstrative strike, a very limited strike, maybe even on their own territory, like the Wagner guy has theorized, and it doesn't lead to a tit-for-tat nuclear exchange. I only see that happening if it gets used on a NATO country, which I don't think they would necessarily do. Some people think if you detonate one nuclear weapon, then it's going to immediately evolve to the level of mutually assured destruction. But look at all the times we've seen these red lines being breached already, where people have thought that things were going to immediately escalate, that Russia is absolutely going to start attacking NATO bases if we do X, Y, and Z, and they simply haven't yet. There is a very good likelihood that this same trend towards the gradual escalation would just continue even after the normalization of the use of tactical nuclear weapons. He goes on to say the first steps have already been taken through statements to this effect by the president and other leaders by beginning to deploy nuclear weapons and their delivery vehicles in Belarus, and by increasing the combat effectiveness of the strategic deterrent forces. This is why Belarusian people were so sus at the prospect of bringing nukes into Belarus. Because what if Belarus is used as the nuclear launch pad patsy here? And it's not the Russians. What if Belarus is the real Russian proxy in the making? The true proxy war, where both the Russians have a Belarusian proxy, maybe even Russian soldiers fighting alongside Belarusians and Ukrainians. Anyways, there are quite a few steps on this ladder, he says. I count about 24 steps on the ladder. And this is where myself, admittedly, has been premature in the preconditions required for nuclear escalation. I think a lot of us figured, okay, they blew up the Crimean Bridge, they're going to use a nuke. The threats of Russia's nuclear doctrine, many people read that like the gospel. I never have, because I think it's still purely for show. And what does existential mean anyways? Does it mean in a fiscal sense? Does it mean, when does the breakup of Russia truly begin? Does it begin when the first rock is thrown at the start of the Civil War? Or does it begin when the government's about to collapse? So existential is largely subjective. It could go even as far as warning our compatriots and all people of goodwill about the need to leave their homes near the objects of possible nuclear strikes in countries directly supporting the regime. So some sort of mass evacuation order that we've seen recently near the Belgorod border. The enemy must know that we are ready to launch a preemptive retaliatory strike in response. That's kind of an oxymoron. Preemptive retaliatory strike? I don't know what they mean by that. In response to its current and past aggression in order to prevent a slide into global thermonuclear war. Hence, escalate to de-escalate. Some people don't put stock in this theory, but quite frankly, a lot of people are wrong about a lot of things in this conflict, myself included. So don't take anything as the gospel. The North Koreans fired off some missiles. Remember when the Japanese said they were going to destroy North Korean missiles if they shot them? And North Korea did that very thing in the direction of Japan, in fact. And they weren't shot down. This is in response to ongoing military exercises between South Korea and the United States. So I guess the Russians aren't the only ones who aren't enforcing red lines. Speaking of North Korea, they have now given their full support to Russia. So we know that that means they're going to have more military partnerships and lots of economic partnerships as well. This is why the photometer was down today. U.S. and China take steps towards thaw as Blinken prepares to visit Beijing. But of course, mistrust remains. Nobody trusts the United States anymore. The Chinese are just playing the game. You know what I'm saying? They're just, they're just following the motions. President Putin hints at Ukrainian objectives, and he said this today. He said, and Russia will end this war by force of arms, freeing the entire territory of the former Ukraine and the United States from Ukrainian NAZIs. There are no other options. When Putin says something like that, you know he means it. There are no other options but to liberate the entire territory of the former Ukraine from the United States. Not sure what he means by former. I'm sure they don't want Lviv and Western Ukraine. Maybe not even Kiev. The Ukrainian army of the US and NATO will be defeated. No matter what type of new weapons it receives from the West, the more weapons there are, the fewer Ukrainians and what used to be Ukraine will remain. Direct intervention by NATO's European armies will not change the outcome. But in this case, the fire of war will engulf the whole of Europe. It looks like the US is ready for that too. Who stands to gain from Europe going up in flames? It's not Europe, but is the US going to be affected by that? Only if they honor their NATO commitments, which you see Joe Biden, he always feels the need to reassert NATO's commitment. You know, anytime he's on camera, they always have to talk about the strength of the NATO alliance. If it was so strong, why do they feel the need to say that every single time? That's something to think about. Because every single time Biden makes a public statement about NATO, they always feel the need to remind us of, don't worry, we'll have your back. And is the United States word worth the money it's written on? I don't know, man. I just don't know. This is not a diss to my American friends. You guys know that. That's a political issue. In terms of global reserve currency, so Yellen, I call her she kind of looks like, in a certain light, she looks like Julian Assange, but an older woman. I don't know where that came from, guys. Now you're all going to go and Google pictures of Julian Assange and Janet Yellen. She says expect a gradual decline in the dollar share of global reserves. But don't worry, the greenback remains dominant. Here's why she's not worried. Because it's the euro that is the one that's competing with the USD. As long as Europe destroys itself with this war, the USA can pick up that slack. Okay? In Japan, that's, their population is going to be half of what it is in just a few years anyways. And everybody else. There's Canadian dollars. Who knows? Maybe we might emerge to compete. I don't think the US will let us, though. And the Chinese. Okay? But there's many other countries who are ditching the US dollar. But, I mean, look at the market share. Even if China's market share doubled, it would barely put a dent in USD adoption. But remember, as this money liquidates, the value of your money is going to contract. So when those dollars come home, when people come in to cash in their chips, that's when the real inflation that's been tied up in all this debt and monetary quantitative easing, whatever it's called, for the longest time, that's when it becomes realized in the purchasing power of the dollar. Here's the map, the smoke map. This is what it's going to look like come Saturday at 8 a.m. in New York City. Okay? So pretty toxic levels of smoke are heading your way. The fires in Quebec are still raging. This is a new map that I'm using here. So this shows you if you can go, I think this is called Zoom Earth. So you can click on any fire. It doesn't actually show you the amount of hectares burned. If you want to see that, you got to look at this map here. So let me just refresh the page so you can see the size of this fire. Look at the size of that fire. It's like its own province. It's not quite the size of, so this is Vancouver Island down here. This is the size of the Donny Creek fire. And there's another big fire burning near Edson. This is one right now that is getting rained on. So they're hoping that that one's going to be suppressed. But that was massive. It was the size of Edmonton. crazy. All kinds of fires burning up here in northern Saskatchewan. Fires that we've already forgotten about. Massive fire up here in, what is this? Northwest Territories. Huge. And the ones in Quebec are raging once again. So, like I said, it's going to be a long, hot, smoky summer, my friends. What other videos do I have to show you here? Do I want to read you this? It's a very bad translation. I don't know if I want to read you this. I don't think I'm going to. Let's just go to my stock pick. It's not a stock pick. It's not financial advice. I'm looking at Nutrien right now, okay? Because Nutrien is undervalued. The PE ratio is something like 4.6, and this is the company that specializes in potash mining. You need potash to grow food. You need potash for fertilizer. Now, if you recall, the price of fertilizer skyrocketed, as did Nutrien's stock right at the beginning of this war, and then it just plummeted, right? Because you had the grain deal, you had some bumper crops here and there, and Europe got through the winter and everybody thought it was going to be okay. But if you can see, all of the analyst ratings are signaling that this is either a buy or a hold. There's only one analyst who's saying sell. At least this is through Market Watch. And the factors that make me think that this stock is about to blow, and again, this is not financial advice, this is what I'm thinking, is that right now you have small harvests in the United States as a result of drought. Okay, a record-setting drought is going to lead to, I think it's the worst drought since 1950 or something like that, since 1957. And even though that's corn, any food crop that's lower is going to increase the demand for fertilizers. You have a growing population in the developed world, which is going to need to eat. You have the situation with Belarus and Russia, which is only intensifying. It's likely that Belarus is going to be brought into the war. And between Belarus, Russia, and Canada, we produce like the overwhelming majority of the world's potash. You have the grain deal, which has been suspended. So it's very likely that Belarusian and Russian potash is going to be taken off the global market in some capacity due to sanctions. I think potash is the one thing that is still subject to sanctions out of all of agriculture, because they made some exceptions for agriculture because they don't want global food riots. But I'm thinking that, the world's going to need food. It's going to be harder to grow food because of all the climatic extremes that we have going on, and global trade is breaking down. To me, it seems like Canada is positioned to be a major player on the potash scene, more than it even is right now. So for that reason, if I had to put money in something, I'm not going into Palantir or Tesla or anything like that, or any, AI bubble at this point in time. I'm still looking at the core commodities. I'm still looking at mining companies. You got to think, when everybody's rushing into something, usually it's close to the peak. So that's just something for you guys to consider. Let me know what you think about Nutrien and this type of investing in the comment section below. And I think that's all I got for you guys today. I don't even really have much gear to show. I do have a piece of gear to show you. This is my new Benchmade knife. I don't even know what it's called. To be brutally honest, I just opened it. But I'm going to do a review on it. It's sweet, man. Look at that. Look how thin that is. This, I always carry two Benchmade knives. I'll post a link to this in the description. This is the Benchmade Bug Out. You can't really see on camera, but this one is thicker than this one, but this is even more sturdy. I still love the Benchmade Bug Out, just the size of the knife and the belly that it has on it. This one's a little bit thicker, a little bit more heavy duty, but listen to that.